My mom and dad were married in Michigan and divorced when I was 2. So I really don't know my parents to have had a relationship together, but they were really good co-parents. And then when I turned probably around 12 or 13 years old, my mom graduated from X-ray school and we moved to Texas for work. I found myself being very alone in the beginning, especially through middle school. But we made it, and I don't think you could pay me to go back now. I graduated high school in '99, and I wanted to be a police officer. I'm not quite sure what motivated me to go down that route. I've always been kind of a square, never been a rule pusher or breaker, so it was just kind of a fit for me.
In 2002, 21-year-old Amanda Siggers is in her second year studying criminal justice at San Jacinto College in Houston, Texas.
I was a young girl that had the world at my fingertips, really. I was having a decent time with my friends, exploring the city and just living life. One day, a friend and I were preparing for a test, and we chose to go to a local bookstore, coffee shop, and study. We happened to look over, and there was this guy sitting at an adjacent table. He was very handsome. After a while, conversation ensued with him.
25-year-old Cy Ghosh tells Amanda and her friend that he works as a pharmaceutical sales rep, but intends to go back to school.
Cy had told me that he graduated from UT with a pre-med degree. He applied to get into Baylor College of Medicine, and he was accepted, but he denied the acceptance and ended up venturing into something else. He eventually got both of our phone numbers, and I thought for sure he was going to call her, but he ended up calling me. And I was ecstatic. The beginning of our relationship was very fun. So I was very much a gentleman from the word go, and he really just laid out the red carpet.
He was very, very polite, very cordial, pretty much like Amanda had told me. He was a tall, handsome man, and I knew that she was, she was very smitten.
Culturally, he was very different from me. I found him to be very interesting. Even though he was raised here in the United States, he had a lot of Eastern values. His parents were first-generation Indians. I got to learn a lot about the temples and just the peaceful nature of Hinduism. It's such a beautiful culture. He told me that his father and mother were divorced, and prior to us getting together, he had moved out of his father's home and into his mother's home. He was very uncomfortable at his mother's house. She would consistently be on him, nagging him about something, mostly his career, because in that culture, career and education is number one. They generally live in the home for quite some time, even after college, in an effort to save as much money as possible. And so he was, staying in the house even at an older age because that's culturally just what was of the norm for them. Cy's mother's name is Lapika. She was very much about money, prestige. She didn't care for the union between Cy and I. He relayed that message to me, and I feel like she wanted him to marry an Indian woman and not a white woman. But we chose to look past it. 3 months later, she realized that he was serious about me because he actually brought me home, and we ended up staying the night there. And she opened up the door, and I was there. She shut the door very fast, and Cy had to go put that fire out. She was very vocal about me being a white bitch, and she didn't want that white bitch staying the night in her house. It was certainly a shock, but I knew that he wasn't going to listen to that. I knew how he felt about me, but it was very hurtful. We ended up leaving, and I don't believe I ever stayed the night there again.
Cy's dad, on the other hand, welcomes Amanda with open arms.
Cy's father, his name is Biz. I did not feel like he was racially against me or us being together. I felt like he genuinely wanted to see us succeed in life. He was just a very kind soul.
In late 2002, Biz asks his son and Amanda to come live with him and his current wife, Kay. He has been diagnosed with terminal cancer and wants to spend his last days with his son.
The first few weeks were good. Kay was on board with everything. She knew that we were there to help and not to hinder. But then it started to decline. I could tell that there was tension between Kay and Cy. Cy went on to tell me that Kay would say false things about him. Eventually, it felt like I was walking on eggshells everywhere I went. One evening, Kay cornered me. She said, "You have no idea the person that you're getting involved with. You have no idea who he is, and I would highly encourage you to stay away." At the time, I thought, whatever, I'm in love, and he's so good to me, and he has nothing good to say about her, so it tainted my ability to really take her seriously.
Despite the tension, all three focus on caring for Biz. Until his death in July of 2003, Cy is inconsolable.
He was devastated. Biz was a primary force in his life, and once he passed, I think that Cy felt empty. I think he felt scared. Very different, mentally very different.
Things come to a head when Amanda finds something suspicious in Cy's car.
I found a box of condoms, and it prompted a lot of questions. He became defensive, and it led to a horrific argument, and I started to get a little bit scared. And I had attempted to make a phone call, and he ripped the phone out of the wall. So I made my way to the front door, and I pushed the panic button on the alarm, which immediately sends a call to 911. So I knew that they were on the way, and he knew they were on the way as well, and he left. So the police showed up, and I let them know what had transpired. I did not press charges. It was hours later that he came back, and I vividly remember just being so upset that he was gone, not knowing what was going to transpire, if we were breaking up.
Cy begs Amanda's forgiveness, and Amanda rationalizes that he is deeply grieving and not acting like himself.
I forgave him, and we just chose to ultimately put it behind us. I had a lot of big hopes for our relationship, and I wanted things to be normal again. So I just made it okay. And we were fine. We were fine after that.
In 2005, Amanda and Cy decide to take the next big step.
I was very happy for my daughter to get married. She was very happy about getting married.
And by this time, Cy's mom has accepted Amanda into her son's life.
So we had a Hindu ceremony at the Meenakshi temple, and 2 days later we had the Christian ceremony. My family came to the Hindu ceremony. I had to wear a red sari, red and gold. It was absolutely beautiful.
The highlight was when I saw them walking towards the limousine to spend the rest of their lives together. That's the way it was supposed to work.
I felt like my dreams were coming true. We were in forward motion.
Cy applies to medical school, and life seems on track. Until he does an about-face and pressures Amanda to change her career.
It came out of left field for sure. He was very adamant that being a police officer, that was a blue-collar job. It wasn't acceptable to him or his family, and he made it very clear that it was not where he saw his life going.
Instead, he wants her to go into healthcare as well.
I was to go through nursing school, and we were going to open and run a practice together. In theory, it was the fairy tale. I caved in because I felt like he knew better than I did. He was 5 years older than me, and he had a plan.
Cy chooses a podiatry school in Des Moines, Iowa, and Amanda gets accepted into a nearby nursing school.
When they moved to Iowa, they were about 10 hours closer to Michigan, I think, so I could see them more often. I would take the train over, help her decorate. And I love doing it. As a father, it was great for me to be able to do that.
But Amanda doesn't adapt well to her new field of study.
Well, I was in a clinical setting one day, and I ended up passing out. And that's when my professor pulled me to the side and said, you know, you may want to rethink your career choice.
She said, Dad, I really want to do it. But she knew that she couldn't do it because she couldn't stay on the side of blood, so.
Amanda decides to withdraw from the program.
When I told Cy, he didn't react well. He made it very clear that he was embarrassed by my decision. He told me he was very disappointed and that I needed to do it. I stood my ground, that I wanted to do something else. And ultimately, he had called me white trash and bitch and wished that I was dead. That's when I realized that I had made a mistake.
When Amanda Ghosh quits nursing school, her husband Cy becomes verbally abusive.
But I'm a loyal soul. I'm very loyal to my mate. And I chose to stay. I didn't think that there wasn't anything that we couldn't fix. I took my vows, my marriage vows, very seriously.
Amanda forges ahead despite Cy's disapproval.
I took all of my criminal justice and nursing courses and wrapped it into a general studies degree, basically the highest level associate degree you can get from a junior college, and I moved on. But I didn't feel proud of that accomplishment, actually. Cy belittled me because it wasn't good enough, and so I felt like a failure.
And I felt that there was things going on that I didn't know about, which relayed into their marriage some friction.
He definitely made me feel devalued. I felt alone, I felt isolated, I missed my family.
And then, a call from out of the blue brings family directly into Amanda's life in an unexpected way.
Amber was my half-sister. She was born to my dad and my stepmom, Joyce. She was 4 years younger than me, almost to the day. The only sister I've ever had. And as she got older, she became dependent on drugs. We went our separate ways.
While struggling with addiction, 21-year-old Amber gives birth to a baby girl, Kelsey. When Kelsey is a few months old, Amber is ordered by a Michigan judge to enter rehab for 90 days.
The paternity had not been established on Kelsey. And I received a phone call from CPS asking me if I would be interested in doing a temporary foster placement for my niece. It was a no-brainer for me, but I wanted to make sure it was okay with Cy to bring her into the home, and he agreed.
In January of 2007, Amanda travels to Michigan to get her niece.
When I first saw Kelsey, she was only 11 pounds at 7 months old. I knew instantly that I was never going to give her back.
Amber was not capable of taking care of a child, but Amanda was, so I was happy that Kelsey was in a safe place.
I knew that I was on the path that God had laid out for me. She was a sickly baby due to being born addicted. She cried incessantly. It is very hard to deal with a baby that never stops crying. But somehow you figure out how to deal with it.
Amber didn't finish her rehabilitation, so the court awarded Amanda to keep taking care of Kelsey.
Even though he never said it, I think Cy felt like he had made a mistake. I think he quickly realized that the responsibility of a child was far more than he anticipated. Unfortunately, it wore Cy down over time. I was doing the laundry one day and the baby was crying. I walked around the corner and he was shaking her violently. I was shocked. I couldn't believe that he was doing what he was doing to such a tiny, fragile little baby. I was just blown away. And it was in that moment that I knew I had to leave. He has absolutely crossed the line. I need to get her out of there. He didn't deserve the title of being a dad.
In May 2007, Amanda moves back to Houston with Kelsey, leaving Cy behind in Iowa.
I was gonna take care of this baby. That was my mission. Why the career choices that I had made and why it didn't pan out. I knew that I was supposed to be Kelsey's mom. I was able to find a townhouse apartment right next door to my mom, which was extremely helpful because she was able to help me with the baby. I got a part-time job so that we could survive. Somehow we made it work. All of a sudden I became a single mom. We were divorced in December of 2008. He filed for divorce and it was uncontested. It was easy, 2-page divorce. I felt like it was the worst thing that had ever happened to me, but probably the best thing that could have ever happened to me at the same time. It was such a weird feeling.
Amanda enrolls in a sonography program for training in ultrasound.
I felt very confident. I found my independence. I was going to school and I was working full-time. Kelsey was going to daycare and thriving in daycare. We were happy. I was free of all of the dysfunction that I had lived in for so long.
But Amanda's newfound peace will not last for long.
So I moved back to Texas in December of 2009, early 2010. And that's when the stalking began.
I can't imagine what that would feel like to be victimized, stalked, harassed, knowing there is a weapon involved. This behavior can't go on forever. When is somebody gonna break?
Amanda Harris has moved on with her life, while Cy flounders.
Ironically enough, he decided that medical school wasn't quite right for him.
Cy drops out of podiatry, converts to Christianity, and returns to Houston.
One day he called me and told me that he had obtained a job at a pizza place near my apartment. And I thought, why in the world would he take a job delivering pizzas? And then it dawned on me that he could drive in and out of my apartment complex on the daily, on the hourly sometimes. I found it to be bizarre behavior.
He's a pizza delivery driver, where being a law enforcement officer wasn't good enough for her. Now he's going to drive and deliver pizzas, not because he wants to, but because it allows him to have the freedom to drive by and check on her whenever he wants to.
In early 2011, 2.5 years after her divorce, Amanda moves to a new home in a new neighborhood and doesn't share her address with Cy. It's a new beginning.
I was encouraged by my friends to get out there, so I put my profile up on an online dating site and I met Wayne.
Wayne Harris works in the motorsports industry and, like Amanda, is divorced with one child, a boy named Nick.
So I met up with him and he thought he was an attractive man and our conversations just flowed so well. I just knew right away. I was so ecstatic to feel this feeling again, to know that I was capable of feeling, you know, the joy, the butterflies again. And he was as well, that we just didn't miss a beat. We decided that we were gonna see each other the very next day, which turned into the very next day and every day thereafter, unless he was out of town for work.
And I thought he's just a fantastic guy. Real nice to be around, very energetic.
So Super Bowl Sunday rolled around and Wayne came over that evening and I was cooking and I would oftentimes let Kelsey play at the park right there because I could see her. She's basically within arm's reach of me. So Kelsey's playing, Wayne and I are talking, and I get a knock at the door, and it's the police officer that lives on site. He had received a call from a concerned person letting them know that I let my child play outside unattended.
Amanda invites the officer inside to discuss it, embarrassed that her new boyfriend is a witness.
We all had conversation. Wayne had conversation with him. We were all in agreement that she was certainly within an eye shot, ear shot, arm shot of me and that she was perfectly fine. I asked the officer who had made the call, and he couldn't tell me, but I knew in my gut who was at the root of this. I felt frustrated. I felt violated again. It's a very uneasy feeling to know you're being watched. At this point, my relationship is blossoming with Wayne, and I didn't let him know everything that was going on because I certainly didn't want to taint a good relationship with my baggage and drama. I didn't want to bring that into the relationship.
Amanda's strategy is to block Cy completely.
I figured he didn't get his way. Hopefully he'll move on now, but that never happened. And he knew exactly what button to push, which was going after my daughter.
It has been 5 years since Amanda took custody of Kelsey. Now, as Amanda is on the verge of becoming Kelsey's legal mother, Cy starts to stir things up.
What he did is he cleverly went to a therapist, told the therapist all of his grievance toward me, and made me out to look like a neglectful mother. And it was her duty to call CPS by state law. I received a phone call from CPS that they were going to interview my daughter that day. I felt mortified, and as soon as she stepped foot in my door, she realized quickly that Kelsey was just fine.
I just couldn't believe that he did that. It was like, when does it stop?
Kelsey, the adopted daughter, is the reason she left him in the first place. So by calling CPS, if that worker had not done a thorough and proper investigation or had just rushed to judgment, then Amanda could have very easily lost Kelsey. And for all intents and purposes, her niece, who is now her daughter, is the most important thing she has. And it would have been devastating.
Concerned that Cy's unpredictable behavior is escalating, Amanda seeks help from the local police.
I don't think it's ever going to go away, and I honestly have no idea how to deal with it. I've gone to the police department at this point. I've talked to officers that have asked me to just ignore it, and as long as he doesn't put his hands on me, there's really nothing they can do. It's very frustrating. I felt horribly harassed, unprotected, and you feel so helpless.
Wayne steps up and asks Amanda and Kelsey to move in with him on the other side of Houston.
It was the best feeling. I felt Kelsey was going to have a great role model, a great father figure. Moving to the north side of town was good because I didn't know where I had gone. And so the stalking had come to a halt for a short period of time. Life was actually going really, really well.
It was very comforting to know that she was with somebody that was safe, and Kelsey too.
That all changes one night when Wayne is away on business.
I woke up to gunshots outside of my bedroom window. I knew he was out there.
In 2012, in the Houston suburb of Tomball, Amanda Ghosh is awakened by gunshots outside her window.
I immediately called the police.
She did not see Cy shoot the gun, but she did see him get in the car. When that happened, well, that's when I really became concerned.
When they showed up, he wasn't there. They checked the perimeter of the home. They didn't find any shell casings. They spoke with the neighbors. None of the neighbors had heard any gunshots, and so I kind of felt like they didn't believe me, and it really went nowhere.
Amanda is on high alert, and it's not long before another incident occurs.
One night, Wayne and I were sitting in the living room watching TV, and our dog ran to the window and was barking his tail off. So I knew somebody was out there, and I had a feeling that it was Cy. Wayne hopped up quite angrily, and I encouraged him to just settle down for half a second, let me call the police and get them there this time so that they could witness what was going on. They were right around the corner, so it only took a couple of minutes, and they caught him there. Thank God. This time he had finally been caught, and they issued him a trespass violation and a warning. We actually felt good after that for a while. We didn't see him for quite some time after that.
With Cy in her rear view, Amanda commits to her bright future.
We decided to get married on 12/12/12 at 12/12 at the Justice of the Peace.
They were very, very happy. And in fact, at the time that they got married, they adopted Kelsey at the same time.
I had been fighting for custody of Kelsey for the better part of 7 years. It was quite the process, but we'd finally gotten there. And then 2 days later, I found out I was pregnant for Gemma.
It was great to see. Wayne wrote notes for the unborn baby for her to read later on and, when she grows up. So he was very, very excited about being a new father.
Gemma was born with a very, very rare condition called bacterial association. She was born with only one kidney, as well as no esophagus, a cardiac defect, and a vertebral defect. Needless to say, she required 24/7 attention, care.
She was a perfect little child. Of course, all of my grandkids were perfect. They are a blessing.
About 1.5 years after Gemma was born, we moved into this beautiful home that neither one of us thought we would ever be able to live in. And here we achieved it. We were on top of the world at this point. Christmas Day, 2015, we woke up rather early with the kiddos because they were just super excited. And we just sat down to open our gifts, and I hear a tap at the door. And who else but Cy?
Cy tells Amanda that he would like to pray with her and her 2 daughters.
I just couldn't believe that he even came back around, especially at a time when a family's getting together for Christmas.
Wayne came unglued that day. He escorted Cy off of our property with a lot of profanity and a lot of anger and aggression.
Cy's stalking has been going on for almost 6 years, ever since Amanda decided to leave him.
There are some individuals who cannot take no for an answer. They cannot move on and regain their sense of balance until they're back in control again. Maybe if Amanda were to run back to him and he could say, "No, I don't want you," then he would have control again and he could move on. Right now, none of the decisions are his, except the ones that he uses to torture and drive them crazy.
She is aware of Texas's strong stand your ground laws and asks the police for more information about self-defense.
So I asked the officer what my rights were. If I had the right to hold him at citizen's arrest until the police got there. He told me that we definitely had that right.
Wayne owns a gun and suggests Amanda buy one too.
Wayne encouraged me to go get my license to carry and buy a weapon to protect myself due to all of this incessant harassment, stalking. So I took a few classes and tried to become as capable with my weapon as possible. June 28th, 2017 was Kelsey's 11th birthday, and she chose to just have a she day. She chose to do all kinds of things like get her nails done, get her hair done, very girly stuff.
Amanda, Kelsey, and Kelsey's friend Georgia meet up with Wayne, his son Nick, and baby Gemma at Kelsey's favorite restaurant.
And after dinner, Gemma was exhausted, so I asked Wayne to take her back home so that I could finish shopping with Kelsey and her friend for her birthday. So he obliged and reached over and gave me a kiss, a really long kiss. The kids were in the background ewing. I'll forever remember it. I stayed at the mall with Georgia and Kelsey for probably about another hour. Kelsey asked me if her friend could stay the night, and I said sure. So all three of us went back to our home. And as I was rounding the corner of my street, I saw Cy on his hands and knees at my front door with Wayne pointing a gun at him. I knew immediately that I needed to protect my family. I reached into my glove box, I grabbed my gun, and I told the girls to sit down and not to move. I got out of the car, I held the gun in that direction, and I called the police.
Hi, I need a police officer as soon as possible. I'm making
Hold on.
an arrest right now.
You can't make a citizen's arrest.
Yes, I've already been informed that I can. I have an ongoing case against this person.
Ma'am.
Get down! Get down!
Who is this man to you?
He is my ex-husband.
On June 28, 2017, Jennifer Provoznik is visiting friends who live down the street from where Amanda and Wayne live.
I work in law enforcement, and it's my day off, so I just wanted to really enjoy my day with my friends.
They are oblivious to the scene unfolding a couple of yards away.
My name is Amanda Harris. I've been down there many times to tell you guys what's going on. He's been told by the police to stay away many, hundreds of times.
Do you have a weapon right now?
My husband and I both have a weapon.
Okay, I'm going to need you to put that weapon up, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay, you and your husband both.
Wayne, he wants you to put your weapon down.
Does this other male have a weapon?
I have no idea.
From inside the car, 11-year-old Kelsey also calls 911.
Send him over right now, please.
What's going on?
My mom's ex-husband, he literally stalks us and he's at our house right now. My parents are yelling at him right now. It's done. I'm sorry. I'm just really scared.
I'm getting help. You stay on the line.
And I hear 3 distinct gunshots and a woman screaming. So at this time, my training kicks in, and I told my friend, I was like, listen, call 911. I'm going down there.
I had been shot, but I didn't know it. It was all so surreal. I saw my husband fall to the ground out of the corner of my eye. And as I sat up from the position I was in, I was shot again. And I was laying between the 2 cars when I saw Sai's feet moving around the car and circle back to me. And when I looked up, he was holding a gun at my head, and he pulled the trigger. But it didn't fire. I had been saved by the grace of God. It didn't fire. And some divine force picked me up, and I got to my feet and I ran for my life.
I see a woman running into the house and slamming the door. And then there's this guy just standing there in between 2 cars, looking around, and he looks right at me and then takes off running.
Sai Ghosh gets in a car and flees the scene.
And that's when a little girl gets out of the car. She looks at me and she starts screaming, "Save my daddy." And I look down, there's a body in the driveway. And I was like, listen, there's a woman behind me. You take your friend. You do not stop till you get to her. Do you understand me? And she goes, yes. And so I sent her off at that point. I look at the individual on the ground, and I knew there was no point of me even attempting CPR or any other life-saving matters.
All I could think is he's gonna fire through this door. And I realized in that moment that I had left Kelsey in the back seat of the car. I ran back out the front door, and I was met by a very kind lady.
I know that she's wounded, and she's also in shock. She's yelling about her babies being missing. She's also screaming, I knew he would do something like this. I knew it. And then she notices the man in the driveway.
She kindly grabbed me by my arm. And that's when I realized I'd been shot in my arm. And she walked me over to his body. And I was able to say goodbye to my husband. And they were putting me in an ambulance shortly thereafter.
When police arrive, they find 5-year-old Gemma and 17-year-old Nick hiding in a closet. That's when Amanda's father drops by on his way home to say happy birthday to Kelsey.
As I got out of the car, there was 3 or 4 policemen that came up to me. And the first thing they said was, Amanda's in the hospital, but she's okay. She's been shot, but she's going to be okay. And right at that point, that's when my heart just fell. And the first thing I thought of was the kids. Are the kids okay? What happened? And they said, yeah, the kids are here. They're with some of the neighbors that are here. And then I said, well, what about Wayne? That's when they continued to tell me he didn't make it.
We begin with that breaking news alert out of League City. A man police initially wanted for questioning is now wanted for murder.
We were the first news crew on the scene. We're getting there, and it's the chaos of the scene because you have a gunman on the run, you have dead body and someone seriously wounded, and everyone's trying to figure out what happened.
They put the hospital on lockdown because Cy was on the run.
I was, at her bedside the whole time. I don't know, it's like a movie, a bad movie. It was a horrible nightmare.
So as this statewide manhunt is going on, police had reason to believe that Cy was going to try to run for the border. And it was a checkpoint in El Paso. They were able to identify that Cy was trying to cross. There wasn't much of a resistance. At that point, even Cy had figured out that this was over and he was going to be taken into custody. When they look inside the vehicle, they do find a gun. They find several clips with bullets inside where the casings match the 12 that were found on scene of the shooting back in Lake City.
I don't know how I made it through. I really don't. But I have children, and they needed me, and life didn't stop. I had to get out of bed every day. I had to accept that he was never coming back. Thank God for my children. I stayed in the house until the trial came, and it took us 2 years to go to trial.
As the family tries to heal, Amanda assumes the only time she will ever have to encounter Cy again is in court. But she is wrong.
Well, one day I get this phone call, and I can clearly see that it's the jail on my caller ID. So I turn on the voice recorder, and I took the phone call.
Hello?
Hello?
I just want to apologize to you. I'm sorry for everything, Amanda. I'm really sorry.
Is this a joke?
No, I just want to apologize.
You almost killed me. Is this a joke?
No, Amanda, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I got scared.
Got scared?
I could not believe that I was listening to this person on the other end of the phone. How is this even allowed? Who is running this jail and allowing a murderer to call his victim?
I just want to pray with you guys. I'll put you on the phone real quick before we go to trial. Can I pray with you? Please, Jesus, please comfort Amanda. Please help me never harm her, never to cause her problems again.
Cy's staggering ability to keep harassing Amanda will even continue through the trial itself.
So I was charged with murder in the first degree, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and stalking.
In the middle of the case, Cy fires his defense attorney and decides he's going to defend himself now.
But I know that he wanted to get me on the stand and question me, and that was his way of doing it. He was able to question me for a very long period of time.
Cy thought that Amanda was going to wilt on the stand. That's not what happened.
Amanda comes through this a hero. The fact that she does not cave, that she looks him straight in the eye and answers his questions. So if he wanted control, he didn't get it. He got to talk to her, but he didn't get the responses, the feeling, the control that he was seeking. So in that case, Amanda comes out a winner.
I don't know how the law allows your attacker to question you. How is that even possible? But it happened.
After the trial wraps up, the jury is quick to return guilty verdicts. And on March 5th, 2020, Cy is sentenced to 50 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole after serving 25 years.
I was disappointed because I feel like he should have gotten life without the possibility of parole. I truly believe that if he were to walk the streets again, if he were to ever get out, that he will kill me. He will finish the job.
I hope he never gets out, and all I can do is just say, let Jesus take the wheel. Even though I'm that close to her, I can't imagine going through what she went through. But we get through it every day. It's a process where we're all working through it.
I was angry with the police. I feel like they failed my family, and I think Cy Ghosh is pure evil. But there's still a big life to live, and I choose to just be happy. We have what, 40? I have 40 summers left. I'm gonna make the best of the 40 summers I have left. Wayne wouldn't want me to waste them.
On the morning of April 10, 2001, the quiet neighborhood of Scottsdale, Arizona, woke up to a sound that would never be forgotten. It was not the sound of a storm. It was not the sound of an accident. It was an explosion. A violent blast tore through a family home, sending flames into the desert morning sky and shaking the houses around it. Neighbors rushed outside, confused and frightened, staring at the smoke rising above the place where, only hours earlier, a family had lived an ordinary life. At first, many believed it was a tragic accident. Perhaps a gas leak. Perhaps a mechanical failure. Perhaps one of those terrible moments when a normal morning suddenly turns into a nightmare. But when firefighters entered the destroyed house, they discovered something far more disturbing than a simple fire. Inside the remains of the home, they found the bodies of 3 people. A mother, a daughter, a son. 38-year-old Mary Fisher, 12-year-old Brittany Fisher, 10-year-old Bobby Fisher. A mother who had once packed lunches, helped with homework, and watched her children grow. A young girl who still had years of dreams ahead of her. A young boy who should have been thinking about school, friends, and the future waiting for him. Instead, their lives had ended inside the walls of their own home. But there was one person missing. The man who should have been there. The husband. The father. Robert William Fisher. At first, his absence created confusion. Maybe he had escaped the fire. Maybe he had been injured and taken away. Maybe he was somewhere nearby, waiting to explain what happened. But as investigators began looking deeper, a terrifying possibility started to emerge. Robert Fisher was not a victim. He was the person they were looking for. And the question that followed would haunt investigators for decades. Where did Robert Fisher go? Because after that morning, he seemed to disappear from the face of the earth. No phone calls. No confirmed sightings. No financial trail. No message to explain why. Nothing. It was as if Robert Fisher had planned his final act carefully, not only to destroy his family, but to erase himself from their story. The case would become one of the most mysterious family murder investigations in American history. A story of a seemingly ordinary man, who hid a darker reality behind the image of a perfect husband and father. A story of a family that vanished in a single night. And a story of a fugitive, who may have spent more than 2 decades hiding somewhere in the world, or may have disappeared forever into the wilderness. For investigators, the mystery began with a simple question. How could someone murder the people closest to him, create a fire meant to destroy evidence, and escape without leaving behind a clear path? To understand that question, they had to look beyond the explosion. They had to look at Robert Fisher himself. Because long before the flames consumed the Fisher home, there were signs that something inside that family was already beginning to break. From the outside, Robert Fisher appeared to represent the life many people imagined when they thought of the traditional American family. He was a husband. He was a father. He worked hard. He enjoyed outdoor activities. He presented himself as a disciplined man who valued family and stability. To neighbors and acquaintances, he could appear calm and controlled. But behind closed doors, another picture began to form. People who knew the family described a relationship filled with tension. Robert was not simply a man who wanted his family to succeed. He was someone who seemed deeply concerned with how his family appeared to others. The image mattered. The appearance mattered. The idea of being seen as a successful husband and father mattered. And when that image began to collapse, investigators would later believe that Robert Fisher may have reached a point where he could no longer accept losing control. His marriage with Mary had serious problems. Mary was reportedly unhappy. Those close to her believed she was considering leaving. For many people, divorce would represent a painful, but survivable chapter of life. A moment of loss. A moment of change. A chance to rebuild. But for Robert Fisher, investigators believed the idea of losing his family may have represented something much more threatening. It was not just the end of a marriage. It was the destruction of the identity he had built for himself. The perfect husband. The perfect father. The perfect family. And when some people feel that identity slipping away, they do not respond with acceptance. They respond with desperation. With anger. With a need to regain control at any cost. The tragedy of the Fisher family was not created in a single moment. It was the result of something much darker developing beneath the surface. And on the night of April 9, 2001, whatever was happening inside that house reached its final and devastating conclusion. The last evening the Fisher family spent together began like any other night. The neighborhood was quiet. The streets of Scottsdale were calm. Families across the area were preparing for another ordinary night. Children were going to sleep. Parents were finishing their daily routines. Nobody nearby knew that inside the Fisher home, a tragedy was unfolding. Neighbors later reported hearing an argument coming from the house. The details of that confrontation remain unclear. No one outside those walls knew exactly what words were spoken. No one knew what Robert Fisher was thinking. No one knew when the moment came that changed everything. But investigators believed that sometime during that night, Robert Fisher made a decision. A decision that would take the lives of his wife and children. A decision that would destroy everything he claimed to protect. The following morning, the home was gone. The family was gone. And Robert Fisher was already on the run. What makes the case so haunting is not only the violence itself. It is the preparation afterward. The evidence suggested that this was not a crime committed in sudden chaos. The fire was not simply a desperate reaction. It appeared designed. The home was set up in a way that investigators believed was meant to create an explosion and eliminate evidence. The destruction was not only about killing. It was about hiding. About removing traces. About making sure the truth would disappear beneath ashes and smoke. But Robert Fisher underestimated one thing. Fire destroys objects. It destroys walls. It destroys photographs. It destroys physical memories. But it does not destroy questions. And after the flames disappeared, thousands of questions remained. Where had Robert Fisher gone? Had he escaped into another state? Had someone helped him? Was he living under a new identity? Or was he somewhere in the wilderness, never to be found? The investigation that followed would become a massive search involving local authorities, federal investigators, and the FBI. Robert Fisher would eventually be placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list. His face would appear across the country. Posters would be distributed. Tips would arrive. Possible sightings would be investigated. But none of them would provide the answer everyone wanted. The man who destroyed his family had disappeared. And the longer he remained missing, the more mysterious the case became. Some believed Robert Fisher died while trying to escape through the harsh Arizona wilderness. Others believed he successfully created a new life somewhere far away. A new name. A new identity. A new beginning built on the ruins of the old one. But whatever happened after April 10, 2001, one fact remained impossible to ignore. 3 people lost their lives. A mother. A daughter. A son. And somewhere beyond the headlines and the investigation files were the memories of who they truly were before they became victims in a crime story. Mary Fisher was not just a name in a case file. Brittany was not just a photograph on a missing persons poster. Bobby was not just part of a tragic investigation. They were people. They had hopes. They had routines. They had a future that was taken away from them. And while the world searched for Robert Fisher, the greatest tragedy was that the voices of his victims became quieter with each passing year. But their story remains. Because behind every mystery of a missing fugitive is another truth that must never be forgotten. Someone was left behind. Someone was loved. Someone deserved answers. And in the Fisher case, those answers have remained buried for more than 20 years. A family disappeared. A man vanished. And the world was left with one of the most disturbing questions in modern true crime. How does a person look at the people they claim to love and decide to erase them? This is the story of Robert William Fisher. The husband. The father. The fugitive. The man who destroyed his own family. And then disappeared. Scottsdale, Arizona, the perfect place to hide imperfection. Before the explosion, before the investigation, before Robert William Fisher became one of America's most wanted fugitives, there was a neighborhood in Scottsdale, Arizona, where life appeared peaceful. It was the kind of place where people believed they knew their neighbors. A place of quiet streets, carefully maintained houses, and families living their everyday routines. The Arizona sun was intense, but the community carried a sense of stability. The desert landscape stretched endlessly beyond the city, creating a strange contrast between beauty and isolation. The mountains stood in the distance, the roads stretched through wide open spaces, and beyond the neighborhoods were thousands of square miles of wilderness. Scottsdale was a city where people came to build a life. A city where success, comfort, and appearances mattered. And in one of those neighborhoods, behind the doors of a family home, Robert and Mary Fisher were raising their 2 children. From the outside, their life looked like the picture of suburban normality. A husband. A wife. 2 children. A home. A routine. The kind of life many people spend years trying to create. But sometimes the most dangerous secrets are hidden inside the most ordinary places. A house can look perfect from the street. The grass can be cut. The windows can be clean. The family can smile for photographs. But behind closed doors, another reality may exist. And that was the reality investigators would later try to understand. Who was Robert Fisher before he became a fugitive? How did a man, who appeared to be a devoted father, become the main suspect in the deaths of his own wife and children? To answer those questions, investigators had to examine not only the crime itself, but the life that came before it. Robert William Fisher was born on April 13, 1961, in Brooklyn, New York. His early years were not filled with the peaceful family image he would later try to create for himself. Those who study criminal behavior often look at a person's past, not because it automatically explains their actions, but because it can reveal patterns. How someone handles rejection. How someone deals with failure. How someone responds when they feel powerless. These moments can become important pieces of a larger picture. As Robert grew older, he eventually moved west to Arizona. The desert became the place where he built his adult identity. He entered the medical field and worked as a respiratory therapist. Professionally, he appeared responsible. He had a career. He had a family. He had the appearance of someone who had established himself. But behind the professional image was a personality that people close to him described as complicated. Robert Fisher was known as someone who cared deeply about control. Control over his environment. Control over how others viewed him. Control over the image he presented. For some people, maintaining appearances is simply a preference. They enjoy looking successful. They want others to see their family as happy. But for Robert Fisher, investigators later believed that appearance was not just important. It was central to his identity. The idea of being seen as anything less than a successful husband and father was something he struggled to accept. And that would become one of the most important elements in understanding the tragedy that followed. The Fisher home was not just a house. To Robert, investigators believed it represented something larger. It represented proof that he had succeeded. Proof that he had created the life he wanted others to see. But inside that home, cracks were forming. The marriage between Robert and Mary was deteriorating. Mary Fisher was not simply unhappy. According to people who knew her, she was beginning to recognize that something was wrong. The relationship had become increasingly difficult. Robert could be controlling. Arguments became more frequent. The emotional distance between them grew. The image of the perfect family was becoming harder to maintain. Mary was a mother who cared deeply about her children. Those who knew her described her as someone who wanted stability and happiness for Brittany and Bobby. Like many parents trapped in a troubled marriage, she faced an impossible situation. She had to think about her own future, while also protecting the lives and emotions of her children. The possibility of divorce was becoming real. And that possibility may have represented the greatest threat to Robert Fisher's carefully constructed world. Because for Robert, losing Mary was not just losing a spouse. It meant losing control. It meant facing a reality he did not want others to see. That behind the image of the perfect family was a marriage that was failing. A home filled not only with love, but also tension. A father who wanted to appear strong, while the foundation beneath him was collapsing. The months before the murders were filled with warning signs. People around the family noticed changes. They noticed tension. They noticed problems. But like many cases involving domestic violence, the signs were not enough to reveal the danger that was coming. Most people do not imagine that a husband and father could become the greatest threat inside his own home. The idea feels impossible. Unthinkable. Especially when that person has spent years building a respectable image. Robert Fisher understood that image. He knew how to appear normal. He knew how to blend into everyday life. He could go to work, talk with neighbors, spend time with his children, and still carry anger and resentment that others could not see. This contrast between appearance and reality would become one of the darkest themes of the case. Because after the explosion, investigators were not searching for a stranger. They were searching for someone who had lived among them. Someone who had shared meals with the victims. Someone who had kissed his children goodnight. Someone who was supposed to protect them. Instead, he became the person accused of destroying them. The geography of Arizona also played a major role in what happened next. The state is a place of extremes. During the day, the desert can be brutally hot. At night, temperatures can drop dramatically. The landscape is beautiful, but unforgiving. Beyond the cities are enormous areas of wilderness where a person can disappear. Mountains, canyons, dry riverbeds, remote trails. Places where a person could walk for days without being seen. For someone trying to escape, Arizona offered something rare in the modern world. Space, distance, isolation. And after the murders, that wilderness would become part of the mystery. When Robert Fisher disappeared, investigators would eventually follow his trail into the remote areas surrounding the Tonto National Forest. A place where the line between survival and disappearance becomes dangerously thin. But before the search began, before helicopters scanned the mountains, before investigators examined every possible clue, there was one final night inside the Fisher home. One final evening when Mary, Brittany, and Bobby were still alive. One final moment when the family looked ordinary from the outside. Perhaps neighbors saw lights inside the house. Perhaps cars passed by without noticing anything unusual. Perhaps someone nearby went to sleep believing that another normal Arizona night was coming to an end. They had no idea that by morning, the house would be destroyed. The family would be gone. And the man at the center of it all would vanish into history. The Fisher home stood as a symbol of a larger mystery. How well can we truly know the people around us? How many warning signs can exist before someone realizes what is happening? And how can a person maintain a normal appearance while hiding thoughts and intentions that are impossible for others to imagine? The tragedy of the Fisher family was not born from a random encounter with a stranger. It happened inside a home. Inside a family. Inside a life that looked ordinary. And that is what made it so disturbing. Because Robert Fisher was not a figure who appeared from nowhere. He was someone who had spent years creating the appearance of being exactly the kind of person nobody would suspect. A husband. A father. A neighbor. A professional. And eventually, a fugitive. The story of Robert Fisher is not only about a crime scene discovered after an explosion. It is about the hidden collapse that happened before the flames ever appeared. A collapse inside a marriage. Inside a family. Inside the mind of a man who could not accept losing control. And as investigators would soon discover, the truth about the Fisher family was buried not beneath the ashes of a destroyed house, but within the final days of a life that was already falling apart. Long before their names appeared in FBI case files and newspaper headlines across the United States, Mary Fisher, Brittany Fisher, and Bobby Fisher was simply a family living what seemed, from the outside, to be an ordinary suburban life. When people remember notorious criminal cases, the attention often settles on the suspect. The face of the accused becomes familiar, while the victims gradually fade into the background. Their identities become reduced to a few lines in a police report, or a brief mention during a news broadcast. The Fisher case should not begin with the disappearance of Robert Fisher. It should begin with the lives that were lost. Mary Fisher was 38 years old. She was a wife, but more importantly, she was a mother whose daily life revolved around her children. Like countless parents across America, much of her time was spent balancing the responsibilities of home, school schedules, family routines, and the countless small tasks that quietly hold a household together. Those who knew the family described Mary as someone devoted to Brittany and Bobby. While no family is without disagreements or challenges, people who interacted with Mary remembered her as caring deeply about her children's well-being. Brittany Fisher was 12 years old. She stood at the edge of adolescence, an age filled with change, curiosity, and possibility. Children at 12 begin imagining who they might become. School becomes more demanding, friendships grow more meaningful, and the future slowly starts taking shape through dreams rather than childhood games alone. Bobby Fischer was 10. He was still young enough to enjoy the simple routines of childhood while beginning to develop his own interests and personality. At that age, life is often measured by school days, weekends, family activities, and the excitement of growing older one birthday at a time. Neither child could have understood the circumstances unfolding within the adult's relationship. Children often notice tension before they understand its meaning. Raised voices, uncomfortable silences, or changes in routine may leave them confused, but they rarely see the full picture. They continue attending school, completing homework, and planning for tomorrow, because they trust that the adults around them will keep them safe. That trust forms one of the strongest foundations of childhood. Parents are expected to provide protection, stability, and reassurance. A home should be the place where children feel safest. Cases involving family homicide are particularly difficult, because they overturn that expectation completely. Investigators later came to believe that the Fisher household had been experiencing significant marital strain in the period leading up to April 2001. According to people familiar with the family, Robert and Mary had experienced ongoing problems in their marriage. Friends reportedly believed Mary had been considering divorce. Divorce is never a simple decision, particularly when children are involved. Families facing that possibility often experience emotional uncertainty as parents weigh difficult choices about the future. In this case, investigators later viewed the deteriorating marriage as an important part of understanding the events that followed. However, it is important to distinguish between established facts and later interpretations. Only Robert Fisher would have known exactly what he was thinking during those final days, and because he disappeared, many questions remain unanswered. What is known is that the family continued with many of their ordinary routines until the night before the tragedy. Like millions of American families, they lived in a suburban neighborhood where daily life appeared predictable. Morning routines, school schedules, work responsibilities, evening meals, weekends spent together. These ordinary moments rarely become part of history. Only after tragedy do investigators and journalists begin looking back, trying to identify signs that seemed insignificant at the time. Human beings naturally search for warning signs after terrible events. We ask ourselves whether something could have been noticed sooner, whether someone might have recognized the danger, or whether the outcome could have been different. Often, those answers remain uncertain. Many families experiencing private conflict never become the subject of criminal investigations. Disagreements inside a marriage do not inevitably lead to violence. That is why people close to the Fishers could not have predicted the scale of what was about to happen. Domestic homicide often develops behind closed doors. Neighbors may know very little. Friends may notice only fragments. Relatives may hear isolated concerns without realizing how serious the situation has become. The most dangerous moments frequently occur inside homes that appear perfectly ordinary from the outside. This reality has made family violence one of the most difficult crimes to identify before it occurs. The Fisher family lived in a neighborhood where homes stood close together, yet the most important events of that final night unfolded beyond public view. No security camera recorded every moment. No witness observed everything that happened. The final hours of Mary, Brittany, and Bobby remain known primarily through the physical evidence later examined by investigators. That absence of direct witnesses leaves unanswered questions that may never be resolved. For investigators, reconstructing the victim's final hours required careful forensic analysis rather than speculation. Their responsibility was to follow evidence, not assumptions. Every room in the destroyed house. Every recovered item. Every forensic finding. Each became part of an effort to understand what had happened inside the Fisher home before the explosion. As the investigation developed, authorities concluded that the deaths had occurred before the fire that destroyed the residence. This finding fundamentally changed the direction of the case. What initially appeared to be a possible accidental explosion became a homicide investigation. The focus shifted from determining the cause of a fire to identifying the person responsible for 3 deaths. For Mary, Brittany, and Bobby, however, labels such as victims cannot fully describe who they were. Behind every criminal investigation are birthdays that will never again be celebrated. Family photographs that suddenly become evidence. School memories interrupted forever. Ordinary conversations that loved ones later replay in their minds, wishing they had known they would be the last. When families lose someone unexpectedly, memories often return in remarkably ordinary forms. A favorite meal. A familiar laugh. A routine drive to school. A birthday card kept in a drawer. These details rarely appear in investigative files, yet they become the memories relatives carry long after public attention moves elsewhere. The Fisher case eventually became internationally known because Robert Fisher disappeared. But the disappearance should never overshadow the loss itself. 3 lives ended inside what should have been the safest place they knew. For professionals who study domestic homicide, cases like this serve as painful reminders that violence within families often grows from patterns of coercion and control that may remain hidden from outsiders. Understanding those patterns does not excuse violence. Nor does it answer every question in this case. Instead, it emphasizes an important truth: victims should never be defined solely by the manner of their deaths. Mary Fisher was more than a homicide victim. She was a woman whose life extended far beyond the final chapter that became public. Brittany was more than a 12-year-old listed in an investigation. She was a child with a future that never had the opportunity to unfold. Bobby was more than a name in court documents and FBI records. He was a 10-year-old boy whose story ended far too soon. Their lives deserve to be remembered with the same dignity that every victim deserves. As investigators continued gathering evidence, one question increasingly dominated the case. If Robert Fisher had survived the explosion, where was he? The search for that answer would soon extend far beyond Scottsdale. It would reach into the mountains and forests of Arizona, involve hundreds of investigators, and ultimately become one of the longest-running fugitive investigations in modern American criminal history. But before the search began, detectives first had to understand exactly what had happened inside the Fisher home during the final hours before the explosion. The answers, they believed, were still hidden somewhere within the ashes, the final night and the explosion. By the evening of April 9, 2001, the Fisher family was at home in Scottsdale, Arizona. From the street, nothing appeared unusual. The neighborhood remained quiet, and there was no public indication that the house would become the center of one of the most enduring fugitive cases in modern American history. Investigators later learned that some neighbors recalled hearing what sounded like an argument coming from the Fisher residence that evening. Exactly what was said, who initiated the confrontation, and how long it lasted remain unknown. No independent witness observed what happened inside the home after the family closed the door for the night. Because Robert William Fisher disappeared and has never been located, there has never been testimony from the only surviving person believed to have been present. As a result, investigators have had to reconstruct the final hours almost entirely through forensic evidence and the physical condition of the scene. According to investigators, Mary Fisher was killed before the fire began. Brittany Fisher and Bobby Fisher also died before the explosion that destroyed the residence. The medical and forensic evidence indicated that the deaths were homicides, and that the subsequent fire was not the cause of death. This distinction fundamentally changed the investigation. What first appeared to emergency responders to be a catastrophic residential explosion quickly became a homicide investigation. Investigators concluded that the fire had likely been deliberately set after the killings. Evidence suggested that natural gas had been manipulated inside the residence, creating conditions that eventually led to a powerful explosion. The apparent purpose, investigators believed, was to destroy evidence and make the deaths appear to be the result of an accidental gas explosion. At approximately 8:42 a.m. on April 10, 2001, that explosion occurred. The blast severely damaged the Fisher home and drew an immediate response from firefighters and law enforcement. Flames engulfed much of the structure, and neighboring residents were forced to evacuate while emergency crews worked to contain the fire. Only after firefighters gained control of the blaze were investigators able to begin searching the remains of the house. Inside, they discovered the bodies of Mary, Brittany, and Bobby Fisher. One family member, however, was missing. Robert Fisher was nowhere to be found. Initially, investigators had to consider every possibility. It was conceivable that he had escaped the fire and was injured, or that he had been away from home when the explosion occurred. Those possibilities quickly diminished as evidence accumulated. Detectives determined that Robert Fisher's vehicle was missing from the residence. They also learned that he had withdrawn cash shortly before the incident. Additional information indicated that he had taken personal belongings before leaving. These actions suggested preparation rather than panic. As investigators pieced together the timeline, Robert Fisher became the primary suspect in the deaths of his wife and children. The case now involved two parallel investigations. The first focused on reconstructing exactly what had occurred inside the Fisher home during the final hours before the explosion. The second centered on locating Robert Fisher before he could disappear permanently. The challenge facing investigators was considerable. The explosion and subsequent fire had destroyed portions of the physical evidence. Crime scene specialists therefore relied heavily on surviving forensic evidence, structural analysis of the residence, autopsy findings, and the timeline established through interviews and records. Every recovered item was documented. Every surviving section of the house was examined. Investigators sought to determine not only how the fire had started, but also the sequence of events that preceded it. As the evidence accumulated, authorities became increasingly confident that the explosion had been intended to conceal the killings rather than cause them. Meanwhile, time was becoming the investigators' greatest enemy. Every hour that passed gave Robert Fisher a greater opportunity to flee. Law enforcement agencies distributed his description, interviewed relatives, friends, neighbors, and co-workers, and attempted to identify possible destinations or individuals who might provide assistance. At that stage, no one could know that the search would continue not merely for weeks or months, but for decades. The events of April 9th and April 10th transformed what had begun as an emergency response into one of the most significant fugitive investigations in FBI history. The explosion marked the end of 3 lives. It also marked the beginning of a mystery that remains unresolved. The next phase of the investigation would shift away from the destroyed house in Scottsdale and toward the vast wilderness of Arizona, where one unexpected discovery would deepen the mystery rather than solve it. By the time the fire was extinguished on the morning of April 10, 2001, investigators faced a scene that was both dangerous and unusually complex. Fires do more than destroy buildings. They alter evidence, weaken structures, and complicate the reconstruction of events. Before detectives could begin answering questions, specialists first had to ensure the remains of the Fisher residence were safe enough to examine. The initial priority was identifying the victims and determining whether anyone had survived. Inside the damaged home, emergency personnel located the bodies of Mary Fisher and her 2 children, Brittany and Bobby. Robert William Fisher was not among them. At first, investigators could not immediately conclude why he was missing. It was necessary to consider several possibilities. He might have escaped the explosion. He could have been injured elsewhere. He might even have become separated from his family before emergency responders arrived. Those possibilities narrowed as the investigation progressed. Crime scene investigators conducted a systematic examination of the residence. Although the explosion and fire had damaged large portions of the structure, enough evidence remained for forensic specialists to begin reconstructing the sequence of events. One of the most significant early findings was that the deaths had occurred before the fire. This conclusion fundamentally changed the direction of the investigation. Rather than treating the explosion as the primary event, detectives now viewed it as something that happened after the killings. Investigators concluded that the fire was likely intended to conceal the crime by destroying physical evidence and making the incident appear accidental. Specialists also examined the home's natural gas system. Their analysis indicated that the gas line had been deliberately manipulated before the explosion. This finding supported investigators' theory that the blast had not resulted from an accidental leak, but from intentional human action. With that discovery, the case officially shifted from a suspicious fire investigation to a triple homicide investigation. Attention quickly focused on Robert Fisher. Investigators reviewed his recent activities and established a preliminary timeline. Evidence indicated that before the explosion, Fisher had withdrawn cash and taken personal belongings. These actions suggested planning rather than a spontaneous disappearance after a tragic accident. His vehicle was also missing from the residence. The absence of both Fisher and the vehicle immediately became a central focus of the investigation. Detectives interviewed relatives, neighbors, co-workers, and anyone who had recently interacted with the family. As with many homicide investigations, authorities sought to understand the family's recent circumstances, their relationships, and any significant changes that might provide context for the crime. Multiple interviews pointed toward ongoing marital difficulties between Robert and Mary Fisher. Friends reportedly believed the marriage had been under strain, and that Mary had considered ending the relationship. While marital problems alone cannot predict violence, investigators considered them an important part of the broader picture they were assembling. As forensic work continued, law enforcement agencies expanded their search beyond Scottsdale. Roadways leading away from the city were examined. Possible travel routes were evaluated. Authorities distributed Robert Fisher's description to law enforcement agencies across Arizona and neighboring states. Time remained a critical factor. Every passing hour increased the possibility that Fisher could travel farther from the crime scene. Approximately 10 days after the murders, investigators made what initially appeared to be a major breakthrough. On April 20, 2001, Robert Fisher's vehicle, a Toyota 4Runner, was located near Tonto National Forest, northeast of Scottsdale. The discovery immediately shifted the investigation into one of Arizona's largest wilderness areas. The location presented investigators with 2 competing possibilities. The first was that Fisher had abandoned the vehicle and fled on foot into the surrounding mountains. The second was that the vehicle itself had been left intentionally to mislead investigators, while Fisher escaped by another means. The discovery became even more unusual when investigators found Blue, the Fisher family's dog, alive near the abandoned vehicle. The dog's survival indicated that at least some time had passed since the vehicle had been left there. However, despite an extensive examination of the area, investigators found no confirmed trace of Robert Fisher himself. Law enforcement launched an intensive search involving officers, tracking teams, aircraft, and specialized personnel familiar with the rugged terrain. Searchers examined hiking trails, abandoned structures, caves, and remote sections of the national forest. The geography posed enormous challenges. The Tonto National Forest covers thousands of square miles of mountains, canyons, dense vegetation, and isolated desert terrain. Weather conditions can change rapidly, and many areas are difficult to access even with experienced search teams. Investigators considered whether Fisher might have died in the wilderness after abandoning the vehicle. Yet despite extensive searching, no human remains, clothing, equipment, or other evidence conclusively linked to Fisher were located. The absence of evidence proved almost as significant as the evidence investigators had already collected. If Fisher had died nearby, why was nothing found? If he had escaped, how had he managed to avoid detection? These questions would remain central to the investigation for years. As weeks became months, the case evolved from a homicide investigation into one of the country's most significant fugitive cases. Tips arrived from across the United States. Possible sightings were reported. Each lead required evaluation. Some were quickly eliminated. Others prompted additional investigation. None resulted in Fisher's capture. The physical evidence recovered from the Fisher residence had answered one critical question. Investigators believed the deaths of Mary, Brittany, and Bobby were intentional, and that the explosion had been staged to conceal the crime. But the evidence could not answer another question that would prove even more difficult. Where was Robert William Fisher? The search for that answer would soon expand beyond Arizona and eventually involve the FBI, transforming the investigation into an international manhunt that continues to generate public interest decades later. In the days following the discovery of the Fisher family murders, investigators faced two equally urgent tasks. The first was to establish exactly what had happened inside the Scottsdale home before the explosion. The second was to locate Robert William Fisher, who by then had become the primary suspect in the deaths of his wife, Mary, and their two children, Brittany and Bobby. Because Fisher had disappeared before emergency responders arrived, investigators treated the search as a race against time. Law enforcement agencies immediately distributed his description throughout Arizona and neighboring states. Highway patrol officers, local police departments, and federal authorities were notified. Detectives reviewed recent financial records, interviewed relatives and co-workers, and examined any available evidence that might indicate where Fisher intended to go. One of the earliest findings suggested that Fisher had withdrawn cash before the murders. Investigators also determined that he had taken personal belongings from the home before disappearing. These actions were viewed as consistent with advance planning rather than a spontaneous decision made after the explosion. Despite these findings, investigators encountered an immediate obstacle. After the murders, Fisher appeared to leave almost no conventional trail. No confirmed credit card activity linked to him emerged. No verified bank transactions established his location. No confirmed telephone activity identified where he had gone. For investigators accustomed to following financial and digital evidence, the absence of such information made the search exceptionally difficult. The discovery of Fisher's abandoned Toyota 4Runner near Tonto National Forest initially appeared to offer investigators a major breakthrough. Search operations quickly expanded throughout the surrounding wilderness. Teams searched on foot through rugged terrain. Helicopters surveyed remote mountain areas. Investigators examined caves, abandoned campsites, hiking trails, and isolated sections of forest. Search and rescue specialists familiar with Arizona's difficult landscape assisted the operation. The environment itself presented significant challenges. Steep terrain, dense vegetation in some areas, and extensive wilderness limited visibility and slowed the search. Authorities considered the possibility that Fisher had died in the forest shortly after abandoning the vehicle. If that had occurred, his remains might have been difficult to locate in such a vast area. At the same time, investigators recognized another possibility. The vehicle may have been deliberately abandoned to create exactly that assumption. If Fisher intentionally left his vehicle near the forest before receiving assistance, or continuing his escape by another method, the search could have been directed toward the wrong location from the very beginning. Without additional physical evidence, investigators could not determine which explanation was correct. As weeks passed, hundreds of leads began arriving. Members of the public reported possible sightings in Arizona and other states. Some callers believed they had encountered Fisher in restaurants, convenience stores, or remote communities. Others reported individuals who resembled his published photographs. Each tip required evaluation. Investigators compared descriptions. They reviewed timelines. They interviewed witnesses whenever necessary. The overwhelming majority of these reports were eliminated after investigation. Cases involving nationally known fugitives frequently generate mistaken identifications. People may resemble the suspect, photographs may be interpreted differently, or memories may become less reliable over time. The Fisher investigation proved no exception. The growing number of unsuccessful leads highlighted another problem. As time passed, Robert Fisher's appearance would naturally change. Hair color could change. Facial hair could be grown or removed. Weight could fluctuate. Aging itself would gradually alter his appearance. If he remained alive, identifying him would become increasingly difficult with each passing year. Investigators also examined Fisher's background for clues that might explain how he could remain undetected. He possessed experience with outdoor survival and hunting. He was familiar with Arizona's wilderness. These skills caused investigators to consider whether he might have survived for an extended period in remote areas before eventually leaving the region. However, surviving indefinitely in isolation without supplies, financial support, or contact with others would present enormous practical challenges. As a result, another possibility gained attention. Perhaps Fisher had received assistance. Investigators explored whether friends, relatives, or acquaintances might have knowingly or unknowingly helped him after the murders. Financial records, interviews, and available evidence were examined for indications that someone had provided transportation, shelter, money, or false identification. Despite these efforts, investigators found no evidence sufficient to identify an accomplice. The possibility could not be completely excluded, but neither could it be established. Another challenge involved the timing of the investigation itself. In 2001, digital technology was expanding but remained far less comprehensive than it is today. Modern investigators often rely heavily on extensive surveillance systems, smartphone location data, electronic toll records, and widespread digital transactions. Many of those resources either did not exist, or were significantly more limited at the time Fisher disappeared. Consequently, investigators depended heavily on traditional investigative methods, interviews, physical evidence, financial records, witness statements, and public cooperation. As months became years, the investigation gradually shifted from an active regional search into a long-term fugitive investigation. The objective also evolved. Initially, investigators hoped to intercept Fisher while he was still traveling. Later, they focused on identifying any indication that he had established a new identity or was living under another name. Age-progressed images were eventually produced to assist the public in recognizing how Fisher might appear after years in hiding. These images reflected one of the central assumptions underlying the investigation, that Robert Fisher could still be alive. At the same time, investigators never ruled out the alternative possibility. If Fisher had died shortly after the murders in an isolated wilderness area, natural processes, and the remoteness of the terrain, could explain why no remains had been recovered. Without physical evidence supporting either theory, both remained plausible. For investigators, uncertainty became one of the defining characteristics of the case. There was substantial evidence supporting the conclusion that Robert Fisher had murdered his wife and children before setting the house on fire. There was extensive evidence documenting his disappearance. Yet there was no conclusive evidence establishing what happened after he abandoned, or was believed to have abandoned, his vehicle. This uncertainty ensured that the Fisher investigation remained open. As the search entered its second year, federal authorities made a decision that reflected the seriousness of the case and their belief that Fisher could still be located. The Federal Bureau of Investigation formally assumed an even greater role in the search, elevating Robert William Fisher to one of the nation's most wanted fugitives. That decision would bring renewed public attention to the case and expand the search far beyond the borders of Arizona. By mid-2001, investigators had gathered enough physical and circumstantial evidence to conclude that Robert William Fisher was the primary suspect in the deaths of his wife, Mary, and their two children, Brittany and Bobby. What they did not have was the one thing every homicide investigation ultimately seeks: the suspect himself. Despite extensive searches in Arizona and hundreds of investigative leads, Fisher remained missing. The abandoned Toyota 4Runner near Tonto National Forest had initially offered hope that investigators were closing in on him. Instead, it became one of the greatest unanswered questions in the case. The vehicle established a probable point along his route after the murders, but it did not reveal where he went next. As local efforts continued, the investigation increasingly relied on cooperation between state and federal agencies. Detectives compared evidence, reviewed timelines, and continued examining every reported sighting. Information was shared across jurisdictions in case Fisher attempted to establish a new life elsewhere in the United States. Authorities also began developing a detailed behavioral profile. Investigators noted that Fisher possessed practical outdoor skills and experience in remote environments. He was familiar with hunting and survival techniques, facts that supported one possible explanation for his disappearance. At the same time, investigators recognized that surviving indefinitely without financial activity, medical care, or reliable support would be extraordinarily difficult. Two broad possibilities continued to dominate the investigation. The first was that Fisher had died shortly after abandoning his vehicle. Arizona's wilderness is vast, and despite extensive searches, it is possible for remains to go undiscovered in remote terrain for many years. The second possibility was that he successfully escaped the area, adopted a new identity, and deliberately avoided any activity that would expose his location. Neither theory could be confirmed. The investigation, therefore, remained active. As public attention grew, law enforcement agencies encouraged citizens to report possible sightings. Every credible lead required review, even when it ultimately proved unrelated. Investigators understood that high-profile fugitive cases often generate a large volume of mistaken identifications. Similar appearances, incomplete memories, or media exposure can all lead well-intentioned members of the public to report innocent individuals. Each report nevertheless represented a potential opportunity. Detectives compared photographs, verified locations, interviewed witnesses when appropriate, and eliminated leads that could not be substantiated. None resulted in Fisher's capture. The significance of the case eventually led the Federal Bureau of Investigation to expand its involvement. On June 29, 2002, Robert William Fisher was placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list. The designation reflected several factors. Investigators believed there was probable cause to charge Fisher with the murders. Authorities considered him potentially armed and dangerous. They also believed that national publicity could generate new investigative leads from outside Arizona. Placement on the 10 Most Wanted list significantly increased public awareness of the case. Fisher's photograph appeared on FBI publications, law enforcement bulletins, and news reports across the United States. His physical description, including his height, blue eyes, brown hair, and distinctive dental work, was widely distributed. As years passed, the FBI also released age-progressed images intended to show how he might appear if he was still alive. The strategy recognized a simple reality. Time changes appearances. Hair turns gray. Facial features age. Weight changes. Someone who disappeared in 2001 might look very different decades later. Age progression technology became an important investigative tool, allowing the public to compare contemporary appearances with updated images rather than relying solely on photographs taken before the murders. Despite renewed publicity, no confirmed sighting established Fisher's whereabouts. The investigation, therefore, entered a different phase. Instead of searching for someone actively fleeing in the days after a crime, investigators were now attempting to locate a long-term fugitive whose status remained unknown. Was he living under another identity? Had he left the United States? Had he died years earlier? Each possibility remained under consideration, because the available evidence supported none conclusively. The Fisher investigation illustrates one of the greatest challenges in fugitive investigations. Even when investigators possess substantial evidence regarding the underlying crime, locating the suspect can become increasingly difficult as time passes. Witness memories fade. Records become harder to obtain. Potential evidence disappears. Meanwhile, if a fugitive remains alive and successfully avoids attention, the passage of time may work in that person's favor. For the families of victims, however, time does not resolve unanswered questions. The deaths of Mary, Brittany, and Bobby Fisher remained the central tragedy of the case. Their loss continued regardless of whether Robert Fisher was eventually found. Years after the murders, the investigation remained open, supported by periodic public appeals and ongoing review of new information. Authorities have consistently encouraged anyone with credible information about Fisher's whereabouts to contact law enforcement. Although no decisive breakthrough has yet resolved the mystery, the case remains one of the most recognizable unsolved fugitive investigations in modern American history. The search for Robert William Fisher did not end when the public attention faded. It simply became a search measured not in days or months, but in decades, the case that never reached a courtroom. In most homicide investigations, the criminal justice process follows a familiar path. Investigators gather evidence. A suspect is arrested. Charges are presented. Witnesses testify. A jury evaluates the evidence. Finally, a verdict is delivered. The Fisher case never followed that path. Although investigators concluded that Robert William Fisher was responsible for the deaths of his wife, Mary Fisher, and their two children, Brittany and Bobby, he disappeared before he could be arrested. As a result, there has never been a criminal trial, no cross-examination of witnesses before a jury, and no judicial determination of guilt or innocence in a courtroom. Instead, the investigation has remained open for more than 2 decades. Following the murders, Arizona authorities obtained warrants charging Robert Fisher in connection with the deaths of his family. Those warrants allowed law enforcement agencies throughout the United States to pursue his arrest if he were located. The charges also provided the legal basis for the extensive fugitive investigation that followed. As evidence was reviewed, prosecutors and investigators worked together to organize the case in anticipation of a future prosecution. In any major homicide investigation, prosecutors prepare as though a trial could begin immediately after a suspect is arrested. Evidence must be preserved, forensic findings documented, witness interviews recorded, and investigative procedures carefully maintained. The passage of time does not eliminate these responsibilities. In long-running fugitive cases, preserving evidence becomes especially important because years, or even decades, may pass before an arrest occurs. Witnesses may relocate. Memories may fade. Investigators may retire. Scientific techniques may improve. For these reasons, law enforcement agencies continue reviewing evidence periodically to ensure that the case remains ready for prosecution, should the suspect ever be apprehended. The absence of a trial has created a unique challenge for the Fisher investigation. Many of the questions that might ordinarily be explored during courtroom testimony remain unanswered. Only Robert Fisher could explain his movements after leaving Scottsdale. Only he could describe what occurred inside the family home during the final hours before the explosion. Only he could respond to the evidence assembled by investigators. Because he has never been found, those questions remain unresolved. The legal process has therefore been suspended rather than completed. For the families of homicide victims, delayed justice often carries significant emotional consequences. Criminal proceedings provide more than legal accountability. They also establish a formal public record, allowing evidence to be examined openly and judicial findings to be made. Without that process, uncertainty can persist indefinitely. The Fisher case illustrates this reality. Investigators have publicly identified Robert Fisher as the primary suspect based on the evidence developed during the investigation. At the same time, because no trial has occurred, the evidence has never been presented before a jury for adjudication. This distinction is an important feature of the American criminal justice system. Investigative conclusions guide law enforcement actions, while criminal guilt is ordinarily determined through judicial proceedings. When a fugitive remains at large, that final stage cannot occur. Federal authorities continued supporting the investigation after Fisher was added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list in June 2002. The designation increased national publicity and encouraged members of the public to report credible information. Over the years, investigators received numerous tips from across the United States and from abroad. Each credible report required evaluation. Some involved individuals who physically resembled Fisher. Others suggested possible locations where he might be living. None produced sufficient evidence to locate him. Advances in forensic science have also influenced long-term investigations such as this one. Although the principal challenge in the Fisher case is locating the suspect rather than identifying him, improvements in forensic analysis continue to strengthen homicide investigations generally. Law enforcement agencies periodically review older cases using newer investigative methods whenever appropriate. At the same time, technological changes have altered the way fugitives are pursued. Modern surveillance systems, digital records, and electronic transactions can make long-term concealment more difficult than it was in 2001. Whether those developments would ultimately assist in locating Fisher remains unknown. As years passed, investigators also released updated age-progressed images to reflect how Fisher might appear if still alive. These images acknowledged an unavoidable reality. A fugitive who disappears at age 40 will not look the same 20 or 25 years later. Public recognition depends upon adapting to those changes. Despite ongoing investigative efforts, Robert Fisher has never been apprehended. His legal status therefore remains unchanged. The homicide charges remain active, and authorities have continued to encourage anyone with credible information regarding his whereabouts to contact law enforcement. The absence of a courtroom does not diminish the significance of the investigation. Rather, it highlights one of the enduring challenges of criminal justice. Evidence can identify a suspect. Investigators can reconstruct a crime. Courts can stand ready to hear a case. But none of those institutions can complete the judicial process until the accused is brought before the law. For Mary Fisher, Brittany Fisher, and Bobby Fisher, that day has never come. Their case remains one of the rare major American homicide investigations in which the central suspect disappeared before the justice system could begin its final work. Whether Robert William Fisher is alive or dead remains unknown. If he is ever found alive, investigators have stated that the homicide case is prepared to proceed. If he died years ago without being identified, one of the most significant fugitive investigations in FBI history may never receive the courtroom conclusion that investigators, prosecutors, and the victims' loved ones have long awaited: the legacy of an unfinished case. More than 2 decades have passed since the morning of April 10, 2001, yet the Fisher case continues to occupy a unique place in American criminal history. It is remembered not only because 3 members of a family lost their lives, but also because the person investigators identified as the primary suspect disappeared before he could be brought before a court. For many homicide investigations, the conclusion comes through a trial, a conviction, or an acquittal. Even when the outcome is painful, the legal process provides a degree of finality. Evidence is presented publicly, witnesses testify, and a judgment is entered into the historical record. The Fisher case has never reached that point. Instead, it remains an open investigation. This absence of resolution has shaped how the case is remembered. Rather than focusing solely on the events inside the Scottsdale home, investigators, journalists, and criminologists have continued to examine broader questions raised by the case. One of those questions concerns domestic homicide. Research consistently shows that the greatest risk of lethal violence within an intimate relationship often arises during periods of separation, or when one partner believes the relationship is ending. While the vast majority of marital separations never involve violence, investigators and researchers have long recognized that controlling behavior, escalating conflict, and threats should be taken seriously. The Fisher case has frequently been discussed within that broader context. Investigators believed that the marriage between Robert and Mary Fisher had been experiencing significant difficulties. Friends reportedly indicated that Mary had considered ending the relationship. Although only Robert Fisher could fully explain his own actions, investigators viewed the deteriorating marriage as an important part of the overall timeline. Cases such as this also demonstrate how difficult it can be for outsiders to recognize escalating danger. Families often experience conflict privately. Neighbors may notice very little. Friends may see only isolated moments. Co-workers may remain entirely unaware. This does not mean warning signs are never present. Rather, it illustrates that those signs are not always visible to everyone outside the household. The Fisher investigation has also become a case study in long-term fugitive investigations. Maintaining an active search over many years requires sustained cooperation among multiple agencies. Physical evidence must be preserved, investigative records maintained, and new leads evaluated whenever they emerge. Even after decades, authorities have continued to encourage the public to report credible information concerning Robert Fisher's whereabouts. Advances in technology have changed many aspects of criminal investigations since 2001. Digital records, surveillance systems, online communication, and forensic techniques have expanded significantly. These developments have helped solve numerous cold cases that once appeared unsolvable. At the same time, the Fisher investigation demonstrates that technology alone cannot answer every question. Without verified contact, confirmed sightings, or recoverable physical evidence establishing what happened after Fisher disappeared, uncertainty remains. That uncertainty has generated several competing theories. Some investigators have suggested that Fisher may have died in Arizona's wilderness shortly after abandoning his vehicle. Others believe he may have successfully established a new identity elsewhere. Neither theory has been confirmed. For that reason, law enforcement agencies have generally avoided presenting speculation as fact. Instead, they have continued relying on evidence while remaining open to credible new information. Public interest in the case has also remained remarkably strong. Books, documentaries, podcasts, and news programs have periodically revisited the investigation, particularly on significant anniversaries. Much of that interest stems from the central mystery: how someone could apparently disappear so completely in the modern era. Yet focusing exclusively on that mystery risks overshadowing the people whose lives were lost. Mary Fisher, Brittany Fisher, Bobby Fisher. Their names should remain central to any discussion of the case. Behind every unresolved investigation are individuals whose futures ended abruptly. Mary would never grow older alongside her children. Brittany would never experience adulthood. Bobby would never have the opportunity to pursue the future that lay ahead of him. These are the enduring human consequences that remain long after headlines fade. The Fisher case also serves as a reminder of the importance of continued vigilance in domestic violence prevention. Professionals who work in victim advocacy consistently emphasize that controlling behavior, intimidation, and escalating conflict deserve careful attention. While no single warning sign predicts future violence, recognizing patterns of coercive or abusive behavior may help individuals seek assistance before situations become more dangerous. Support services, legal protections, and community awareness have expanded since 2001, reflecting a broader understanding of the complexities surrounding family violence. Even so, investigators acknowledge that preventing every tragedy is impossible. Each case presents unique circumstances, and hindsight often reveals connections that were not obvious beforehand. Today, the homicide investigation remains open. The arrest warrants remain active. Authorities have not closed the file. As long as Robert William Fisher's whereabouts remain unknown, investigators continue to regard the case as unresolved. Whether the investigation ultimately ends with an arrest, the discovery of conclusive evidence regarding Fisher's fate, or another development entirely cannot be predicted. What can be stated with certainty is that the passage of time has not diminished the significance of the case. It remains one of the most recognizable fugitive investigations in the history of the FBI. More importantly, it remains the story of 3 lives that ended far too soon. The enduring lesson of the Fisher case is not simply that a suspect disappeared. It is that justice can be delayed for years, even decades, and that unanswered questions continue to affect investigators, surviving relatives, and the communities left behind. For every open homicide investigation, the ultimate goal remains the same: to establish the facts, preserve the evidence, and pursue accountability wherever the evidence leads. In the Fisher case, that pursuit continues. What happened to Robert Fisher? One of the most enduring aspects of the Fisher case is that the central mystery did not end with the investigation into the deaths of Mary, Brittany, and Bobby Fisher. Instead, it evolved into a second mystery that remains unresolved more than 2 decades later. What happened to Robert William Fisher after he left Scottsdale in April 2001? Investigators have never announced evidence that conclusively answers that question. As a result, several theories have been discussed over the years. None has been proven, and each has significant limitations. The first theory is that Fisher died shortly after abandoning his vehicle near Tonto National Forest. This possibility has always been considered plausible because of the environment in which the Toyota 4Runner was found. The surrounding area contains rugged mountains, steep canyons, dense vegetation in places, abandoned mine shafts, and large expanses of remote terrain. Weather conditions can also be extreme, with intense daytime heat, limited water sources, and difficult hiking conditions. Search teams examined the area extensively after the vehicle was discovered. Helicopters, ground crews, and specially trained personnel searched for evidence that Fisher had remained in the wilderness. Despite these efforts, no confirmed trace of him was found. Supporters of this theory argue that Arizona's vast wilderness has concealed missing persons before, and that natural processes can make recovery extremely difficult in remote locations. However, investigators also recognize an important weakness. Years of searches have produced no confirmed human remains, no personal equipment, and no physical evidence demonstrating that Fisher died in the area. The second theory is that Fisher successfully escaped and established a new identity. This theory draws attention to several aspects of the investigation. Authorities determined that Fisher withdrew cash before the murders and disappeared before the explosion was reported. Investigators also concluded that he had taken personal belongings with him. These actions suggested planning rather than an impulsive flight. Supporters of this theory argue that Fisher may have left Arizona soon after abandoning his vehicle, or that the vehicle itself was intentionally placed there to misdirect investigators. If that occurred, he may have traveled elsewhere within the United States, or even abroad. Law enforcement has never announced evidence confirming that such an escape occurred, but investigators have also never ruled it out. A third possibility occasionally discussed is that Fisher received assistance after the murders. This hypothesis proposes that another individual may have provided transportation, shelter, money, or other support that enabled him to avoid capture. Investigators examined this possibility during the investigation by interviewing relatives, acquaintances, and others connected to Fisher. To date, authorities have not publicly identified evidence sufficient to establish that anyone knowingly assisted him. Consequently, this theory remains speculative. The Fisher case illustrates an important principle of criminal investigations. The absence of evidence should not automatically be interpreted as evidence supporting any particular theory. Investigators distinguish carefully between what is supported by evidence and what remains possible but unproven. In this case, substantial evidence supported the homicide investigation itself. Far less evidence exists regarding Fisher's fate after he disappeared. This distinction explains why the investigation remains open. Over the years, reported sightings have periodically generated renewed public attention. Individuals in different states, and on occasion, outside the United States have been reported as resembling Robert Fisher. Each credible report has required evaluation by law enforcement. Most have ultimately been eliminated after investigators compared photographs, reviewed records, or interviewed witnesses. None has resulted in Fisher's confirmed identification. The passage of time has complicated these efforts. Someone who disappeared in 2001 would naturally appear significantly different today. To address this challenge, the FBI released age-progressed images, showing how Fisher might look if still alive. Such images are investigative tools rather than predictions. They assist members of the public in recognizing possible changes associated with aging while acknowledging that actual appearance can vary considerably. The case has also prompted discussion among criminologists about long-term fugitive behavior. Research indicates that individuals who successfully avoid capture for extended periods often limit contact with former associates, avoid situations requiring official identification, and adopt routines designed to reduce public attention. Whether Fisher followed such a pattern cannot be established, because his whereabouts remain unknown. Another question concerns motive. Investigators considered the deteriorating marriage between Robert and Mary Fisher an important component of the investigation. Friends reportedly indicated that the relationship had become increasingly strained, and that Mary had considered divorce. Researchers who study family homicide have observed that some offenders perceive separation as a profound loss of control. This research helps investigators understand possible behavioral patterns across cases, but it cannot explain an individual offender's decisions with certainty. Only Robert Fisher could fully account for his own actions and intentions. Because he has never been located, many questions remain unanswered. The Fisher investigation, therefore, occupies an unusual position in American criminal history. The homicide investigation produced a clear investigative direction. The fugitive investigation produced enduring uncertainty. Both remain linked. If Robert Fisher were found alive today, investigators would seek to arrest him on the outstanding charges, and prosecutors would have the opportunity to present the evidence in court. If evidence someday establishes that Fisher died years earlier, another chapter of the mystery may finally be resolved, even though a criminal trial would no longer be possible. Until then, investigators continue to classify the case as open. The unanswered questions surrounding Robert Fisher have attracted public attention for more than 20 years. Yet the central fact of the investigation has never changed. 3 members of one family lost their lives. The search for answers continues not because of the mystery alone, but because every unresolved homicide investigation represents an ongoing commitment to accountability, evidence, and the hope that, eventually, the remaining questions can be answered. More than 20 years after the deaths of Mary Fisher and her children, Brittany and Bobby, the Fisher investigation continues to be studied by law enforcement professionals, criminologists, and researchers interested in fugitive investigations and family homicide. While the case remains unresolved in one critical respect, the whereabouts of Robert William Fisher, it has nevertheless provided important lessons about criminal investigations, evidence preservation, interagency cooperation, and the challenges of locating long-term fugitives. One of the first lessons concerns the value of the initial crime scene response. When firefighters arrived at the Fisher residence on the morning of April 10, 2001, their immediate responsibility was to protect life and extinguish the fire. At that stage, there was no reason to assume they were entering the scene of a homicide. Their actions reflected standard emergency procedures for a residential explosion. Only after the fire had been brought under control could investigators begin examining the remains of the house. This transition, from emergency response to criminal investigation, is one of the most important phases in any major case. Fire scenes are particularly challenging because heat, structural collapse, water used to extinguish flames, and debris can all alter or destroy evidence. Investigators therefore worked carefully to document every recoverable element of the scene before drawing conclusions. The Fisher investigation demonstrates why forensic evidence is often more reliable than first impressions. Initially, the explosion appeared consistent with a possible gas leak. As specialists examined the residence more closely, however, they identified evidence indicating that the deaths had occurred before the explosion. They also concluded that the home's natural gas system had likely been intentionally manipulated. Those findings fundamentally changed the investigation. Rather than searching for the cause of an accidental fire, detectives began reconstructing a homicide. The case also illustrates the importance of combining forensic evidence with investigative timelines. Physical evidence can establish what occurred at a location, but investigators also seek to understand when events happened and how individuals moved before and after the crime. In this investigation, authorities reviewed financial records, vehicle movements, witness interviews, and other available information to reconstruct Robert Fisher's activities during the days immediately preceding the explosion. This timeline became one of the central investigative tools. It suggested planning rather than a spontaneous departure, and helped explain why Fisher quickly became the primary suspect. Another important lesson concerns the role of interagency cooperation. Major investigations rarely involve a single organization working alone. Local police departments, fire investigators, forensic laboratories, prosecutors, state agencies, and eventually the Federal Bureau of Investigation, all contributed to different aspects of the Fisher case. Each agency brought specialized expertise. Fire investigators analyzed the explosion. Forensic specialists examined physical evidence. Detectives conducted interviews. Federal authorities coordinated the nationwide fugitive investigation. Such cooperation is essential when investigations extend beyond local jurisdictions. The search for Robert Fisher also demonstrates the challenges involved in pursuing a long-term fugitive. Immediately after a suspect disappears, investigators often have access to recent financial activity, witness observations, and travel information. As time passes, however, those sources become less useful. Witness memories become less precise. Records may no longer be readily available. Potential evidence may disappear. At the same time, if a fugitive intentionally avoids official identification, locating that individual becomes progressively more difficult. This reality explains why investigators frequently emphasize the importance of public assistance during fugitive investigations. Members of the public may encounter information unavailable through traditional investigative methods. A former acquaintance may recognize an updated photograph. Someone may notice similarities between a published image and an individual using another identity. Although many reported sightings ultimately prove unrelated, investigators generally encourage credible reports, because a single accurate observation can transform an investigation. The Fisher case has also highlighted the importance of age progression techniques. Human appearance changes naturally over time. Hair color changes. Facial features mature. Weight fluctuates. Scars become less noticeable or more pronounced. To account for these changes, forensic artists and imaging specialists produce age-progressed photographs based on established methods of facial aging. These images are investigative aids rather than exact predictions, but they improve the likelihood that long-term fugitives can still be recognized years after their disappearance. Technology has changed dramatically since 2001. When Robert Fisher disappeared, smartphones, social media, widespread digital surveillance, and many modern electronic tracking systems either did not exist or were far less common than they are today. Modern investigators often have access to location data, electronic payment histories, digital communications, and surveillance footage from numerous sources. Such information can significantly assist investigations involving contemporary crimes. The Fisher case therefore illustrates how investigative methods have evolved over time. At the same time, investigators caution against assuming that technological advances alone solve criminal cases. Evidence must still be interpreted carefully. Witness statements require verification. Forensic conclusions must be supported by scientific analysis. Technology is a tool, not a substitute for systematic investigation. The case has also become relevant to discussions surrounding domestic homicide prevention. Researchers studying intimate partner violence emphasize that no single characteristic predicts future violence. However, patterns such as escalating control, possessiveness, threats, and severe relationship conflict may indicate increasing risk in some situations. Understanding these patterns helps inform prevention efforts, law enforcement training, and victim support services. It is important, however, to distinguish between recognized risk factors and certainty. Most individuals experiencing marital conflict do not commit violent crimes. Investigators therefore evaluate each case individually rather than relying on assumptions. Another enduring lesson concerns evidence preservation. Because Robert Fisher has never been apprehended, investigators have had to preserve evidence for decades. This includes physical evidence, forensic reports, witness interviews, photographs, and investigative documentation. Proper preservation ensures that, Should Fisher ever be located, prosecutors will still be able to present the available evidence in court. Long-term evidence management has become an increasingly important aspect of unresolved homicide investigations across the United States. The Fisher investigation also reminds investigators that unresolved cases remain active responsibilities. An investigation does not necessarily end because public attention decreases. Authorities periodically review evidence, assess new information, and evaluate credible leads whenever they emerge. This continuing process reflects an important principle of criminal justice. Unresolved homicide investigations remain open until sufficient evidence establishes otherwise, or legal proceedings reach a conclusion. Today, more than 2 decades after the events in Scottsdale, the Fisher case remains one of the FBI's most widely recognized fugitive investigations. Whether Robert Fisher is alive or dead has never been conclusively established. What has been established is the enduring commitment of investigators to preserve the evidence, pursue credible information, and remain prepared should the opportunity arise to resolve the case. For students of criminal investigation, the Fisher case offers lessons that extend far beyond a single crime. It demonstrates the importance of careful forensic work. It highlights the value of cooperation between agencies. It illustrates the difficulties inherent in long-term fugitive investigations. And it reminds investigators that the search for answers may continue long after public attention has shifted elsewhere. The ultimate objective has remained unchanged since April 2001, to establish the facts as completely as possible, to preserve the integrity of the evidence, and to seek accountability wherever the evidence ultimately leads. The Fisher case has often been discussed not only because of its unresolved fugitive investigation, but also because it illustrates broader issues that criminologists, psychologists, and law enforcement professionals continue to study. While every homicide investigation is unique, certain themes emerge repeatedly in cases involving violence within families, long-term fugitives, and the challenges of preventing domestic tragedies. One of the most significant themes is the distinction between public appearance and private reality. Families experiencing serious internal conflict may continue to appear stable to neighbors, co-workers, and even close friends. Daily routines often continue uninterrupted. Children attend school. Adults go to work. Social activities may continue as usual. These outward signs of normality can make it extremely difficult for others to recognize escalating problems inside the home. Researchers who study domestic violence caution against assuming that a family's public image accurately reflects its private circumstances. Some households experiencing severe conflict leave few visible signs for outsiders to observe. This does not mean violence is inevitable whenever relationships deteriorate. In fact, the overwhelming majority of couples who experience marital difficulties never engage in serious violence. However, understanding that private conflict may remain hidden has influenced how professionals approach risk assessment and victim support. The Fisher investigation has also contributed to discussions about coercive and controlling behavior within intimate relationships. Modern research recognizes that domestic abuse may involve more than physical violence. Patterns of intimidation, isolation, excessive control, threats, and emotional manipulation can also have profound effects on victims. Professionals now emphasize that these behaviors deserve careful attention, particularly when they become more frequent or severe. Since 2001, public awareness of domestic violence has increased considerably. Many communities have expanded access to crisis services, emergency shelters, counseling, legal protections, and specialized law enforcement training. Although no prevention strategy can eliminate every tragedy, these developments reflect decades of research aimed at identifying individuals and families at elevated risk. The Fisher case also highlights another important issue: missing fugitives. Long-term fugitive investigations differ substantially from most criminal investigations. Initially, investigators often possess a relatively clear timeline, recent witness accounts, and fresh physical evidence. As years pass, however, the investigation changes. Witnesses relocate. Memories fade. Businesses close. Records become more difficult to obtain. Meanwhile, if the fugitive remains alive and successfully avoids detection, identifying that individual becomes increasingly complex. To address these challenges, investigators rely upon periodic case reviews. Cold case units and fugitive task forces regularly revisit older investigations using updated forensic methods, improved databases, and newly available technology. Advances in fingerprint comparison, DNA analysis, digital record systems, and facial imaging have helped resolve numerous cases once believed unsolvable. Even so, investigators acknowledge that technology cannot answer questions unsupported by evidence. The Fisher investigation demonstrates this limitation clearly. No confirmed financial activity has established Robert Fisher's location after his disappearance. No verified communication has identified his whereabouts. No confirmed physical evidence has resolved whether he remained alive after abandoning his vehicle. Consequently, investigators continue evaluating the case based upon available evidence rather than speculation. Another aspect frequently discussed by criminologists involves offender behavior following major crimes. Research indicates that individuals respond very differently after committing serious offenses. Some surrender. Some remain near the crime scene. Others attempt immediate flight. Still others die by suicide. Because human behavior varies considerably, investigators avoid assuming that one pattern necessarily applies in every case. This principle has shaped the Fisher investigation from the beginning. Authorities have consistently maintained multiple possible explanations regarding Fisher's fate, while seeking evidence capable of confirming or excluding each one. Public involvement has remained another essential component of the investigation. Many significant criminal cases have ultimately been solved because an individual recognized a photograph, remembered a conversation, or reported information that initially appeared insignificant. For this reason, investigators continue encouraging members of the public to report credible information concerning long-term fugitives. Each report is evaluated on its own merits. Although most tips do not result in arrests, investigators recognize that even a single accurate observation can prove decisive. The Fisher case has also influenced discussions regarding media coverage of unresolved investigations. Responsible reporting serves several important purposes. It informs the public. It encourages witnesses to come forward. It preserves historical records. It maintains awareness of unresolved cases. At the same time, journalists and documentary producers face important ethical responsibilities. Investigative facts should be distinguished from speculation. Victims should be remembered as individuals rather than merely as participants in a criminal case. Unverified theories should not be presented as established conclusions. These principles help preserve public trust, while respecting those most directly affected by violent crime. For investigators, one of the most enduring lessons concerns persistence. Some homicide investigations have remained unresolved for decades before new evidence emerged. Advances in forensic science, renewed witness cooperation, or unexpected discoveries have occasionally transformed cases once believed impossible to solve. As a result, law enforcement agencies generally avoid declaring unresolved homicide investigations permanently closed unless compelling evidence establishes that no further investigative action is possible. The Fisher investigation remains open precisely because investigators recognize that future developments cannot be predicted. A previously unknown witness may come forward. Previously unavailable records may become accessible. New forensic methods may provide additional insights. Or evidence regarding Robert Fisher's fate may eventually be discovered. Until such evidence exists, investigators continue preserving the case for possible future action. For students of criminal justice, the Fisher investigation demonstrates that successful investigations depend upon patience as much as urgency. Initial response is critical. Evidence collection must be thorough. Documentation must be meticulous. Long-term case management must remain organized. These principles apply regardless of whether an investigation concludes within days or continues for decades. More broadly, the case reminds society that homicide investigations are not solely about identifying offenders. They are also about establishing an accurate historical record, preserving evidence, providing answers whenever possible, respecting victims and their families, and maintaining confidence in the rule of law, even when immediate resolution proves impossible. Today, the Fisher case continues to be referenced in discussions of domestic homicide, fugitive investigations, forensic science, and criminal justice education. Its unresolved status has ensured continuing public interest, but its lasting significance lies in the investigative lessons it continues to provide. More than 20 years later, one central objective remains unchanged: to determine, as completely and accurately as the available evidence allows, what happened to the Fisher family in April 2001, and, if possible, what became of Robert William Fisher afterward.